Welcome to an emergency news flash episode of the Arena Craft podcast, a show dedicated exclusively to Magic the Gathering Arena. My name is Arjuna. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined today by Covertgoblue. How are you doing today, Covertgoblue?
I was gonna say things along the lines of, it's Monday, I'm tired, I got work to do, I'm sad, my favorite foods are not in the refrigerator, but then something happened. Something insane happened. And pretty much the moment I touched the internet, I noticed there were way more ats, mentions, DMs, and just everything than I have ever seen before in my life. And I thought that, like, Magic itself had exploded. Turns out it was just the standard Pioneer, historic Brawl meta we know. All of it basically turned upside down.
Yeah, I mean...
But how are you?
Basically, I discovered that both Christmas and my birthday had relocated to the date of August 3rd. It was a surprise, but, you know, we roll with it. So, yeah, basically, it's funny. I think I remember seeing, like, JRR2 yesterday posted a tweet, something to the effect of, looking forward to those sweet bans you're going to post tomorrow, Wizards. And I think that he was like, you know, half joking, half like maybe they will actually ban Wilderness Wreck finally, and you know, at least some semblance of order will return to standard. I don't think anyone could have predicted that we were going to have a banned and restricted announcement quite as deep and quite as sweet as this one. Mm-hmm. And you know what's all right. I don't want to dunk on Wizards, I really don't, because they've done the right thing here. But all I'm going to say is, doesn't it just feel nice to, like, actually have the game look like 90% of the player base want it to look? I mean, it's just like, it feels really good.
We will see.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that we're definitely going to need to get into the formats and see how they feel and see what the adjustments actually do. And who knows, you know, maybe when all is said and done, Wizards will emerge as being the wise and sage people, and they'll say, I told you so. But I think, anyway, certainly, in the very least, a ton of people are super excited to be playing Magic again right now, and I just think that that's a great place to start.
It's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful place to be and a wonderful place to start. It was... I just recorded a reaction stream, or I just streamed a reaction stream. So I was live not that long ago. I was live for about 4 hours. It was like the second I saw this, I was like, do I tweet? Do I make a video? What do I do? It's like, you just got to go live. People want to talk about this. You know what I mean? Yeah. So at one point we had 1,100 people hanging out.
Nice.
Just giving their takes on things. It was really fun. I got to read the whole thing to them in my sarcastic voice. But this is the real deal. August, people forget this all the time. Like, when's the last time an August meta was good?
Yeah, right.
Okay. I actually plan for August to be a terrible month of Magic the Gathering. I planned for it last year. I pre-recorded 2 weeks of content in July because I knew I wouldn't want to make content in August. Like,
nice.
That's how I keep the streak going. That's how I stay going as a content creator. I actually plan for the times when I'm not going to have fun playing Magic. It seems like a lot of people go from excitement about Magic to I'm not having fun playing Magic. I predict that. I know it's coming. And this flipped the script. Like, instead of a dead format for the next 2 months waiting for rotation, we have a new format. We have a freaking birthday present. And I think a lot of people are going to be saying, we could have been playing this the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's super exciting. I can already tell that everybody is going to take this opportunity to say, is my insert not even tier 3 deck playable again?
Sure.
Which to me, I'm always like, it never was, but okay.
But we at least want the chance to like maybe see if it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
hope.
We don't want to dismiss something, like we don't want to have things just like banned before they've even been tried, right? So
right.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of what has effectively happened here. It's not so much that a handful of cards have been banned in Standard and Historic. It's more like 30% of interesting cards just got unbanned, essentially. Or rather, just went from being basically unplayable Tier 2 cards back into this question of, maybe some of these other cards could be Tier 1. Some of these other archetypes could be Tier 1. I mean, heck, even if we see some kind of like older archetypes come back to the front, like, you know, just as one example, like some of these flash decks, even if we see a return to some familiar stuff being Tier 1, it's something different, right? It's just something else to play in your format before rotation, and in the very least we get to see how those old archetypes are going to match up against some of the newer cards. So I think that that's super exciting. Why don't we just read off the bans first of all, and to get everyone familiarized, and then I don't know, we can maybe take it by format. So for the small handful of people who may not have heard about this or may not have read it, here's what we've got. Today, on August 3rd, effective immediately, by the way, props to Wizards for that, they have banned in the Standard format Wilderness Reclamation. Hallelujah.
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 Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Growth Spiral is also banned. Teferi Time Raveler is banned. Wow. And because they listen to you, CGB, because they really like you. They really like you today, CGB. They even banned Cauldron Familiar.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That one I think is definitely the most controversial ban on the list, just in terms of, you know, the player base and in terms of how powerful is it really? Blah 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 blah. So we'll get to that in a moment. They also actually we don't cover this on the show, but it is just quickly. I'm going to note that in Pioneer also saw a number of problem cards get banned, and people were kind of crapping on Wizards of the Coast for their basically non-ban announcement a little while ago as it regarded Pioneer. So they got rid of Inverter of Truth, Kethis the Hidden Hand, Walking Ballista, and Underworld Breach. So that's definitely going to shake up that format and make a lot of people happy, and it's kind of like the standard bans. This is like the ban that everyone knew Pioneer needed that hadn't happened yet. So, and then in Historic, we have Wilderness Reclamation suspended, which is nice. We were full of bile about this card on the other podcast that we just recorded. And Teferi Time Raveler, again, is suspended. So we're kind of like seeing a familiar pattern here where like problem cards get banned in Standard and then they also get banned in Historic. And it's basically just for the reasons we were talking about, which is that a lot of the best stuff to be doing in Historic is also the best stuff to be doing in Standard right now, because the recent sets are just super powerful. So shouldn't be surprising to see that mirrored, but it is nice. It is nice to see that that's happening as well. Finally, in Brawl, Teferi Time Raveler is also banned. So they essentially just unprinted Teferi Time Raveler from 3 formats in one day.
From MTG Arena. Basically, from MTG Arena. Go on. Yes.
Yeah. They just removed... I mean, we traveled back in time. You know, we traveled back in time about a year, and here we are. All right, CGB, so let's get into Standard here. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to talk about. Where do you want to pick it up?
Let's go card by card and say if this needed to be banned, when it should have been banned, and is it the right ban.
Excellent.
So I'll kick it off. Wilderness Reclamation is banned. Did it need to be banned? I think that this is a universal yes. The card has taken over the format. it's enabling of just tons of mana and play patterns that feel really repetitive. They're complicated to play, and they're very difficult to play, and it's very skill rewarding. But the pro meta is, like, the pros are done with standard for a while.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Like, the last Players Tour was the last stand of standard for a while. It's going to be historic for a little bit until the Zendikar Rising Championship, which I think is like in October, November. I don't know. But anyway, the pros are off standard for a bit. And I think that's honestly the only reason. I think it really... I feel like they just held on for the pro meta because it is very skill intensive. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew it was busted, but it is very hard. And I think they thought that would carry things in the pro circuit. I don't know, but the pros hated it too. So this was banned. It's right. It had to go for this format to be interesting, and for many formats to be interesting, historic as well. You know, Wilderness Reclamation is starting to make waves in Modern as people are starting to play it more. But just, if you're going to get rid of fires, because it basically is a mana fixer that allows for busted stuff, Wilderness Reclamation is on the same tier, and people have been saying this since the card was spoiled. So, it's got to go, but is it the right time? Like, what do you think of the timing on this? I kind of said my bit.
I mean, I think the right time to ban this was when they banned Fires of Invention, to be honest. And again, it was mostly, like we said on one of our previous shows, just because anyone could have foreseen that Reclamation was next in line for being the strongest deck. And so, I don't know, I think it's a little bit disingenuous for Wizards to say, well, I don't know, let's see how it goes. This deck hasn't been fully tier 1 ever before in standard. But, it was just kind of like anyone who was paying attention to the format was like, no, this deck is already, like, right on the edge of being the best deck in the format, and the only reason it's not is because these other cards that just got banned are on top. So I don't know. I think that they kind of missed on that one. I mean, to be honest, like many people have said, you just shouldn't be printing cards like this is really what it comes down to. Like, it shouldn't have existed in the first place, but given that it did exist, they should have banned it back then.
Yeah, rip Wilderness Reclamation. You will not be missed.
Nope.
When looking at the deck, kind of the Teamer Rec deck of its name, it's very much like that can't exist. This card was propping it up. 100%. That deck is gone.
Yeah. Right. Expansion Explosion was basically just unprinted from standard.
The next one, Growth Spiral, is an interesting one because it fits in so many decks. It goes across several decks, and it looks like a fairly innocent-ish card until you've played it a lot and until people have figured out that it just makes you play like 30 lands. So, is Growth Spiral the right ban, and is this the right time for it? What do you think?
Okay, so here's my thought about Growth Spiral. I think anyone with a history in Magic looked at Growth Spiral and when it was first revealed and said, wow, that's a good card, Like, I think that it was easy to see that the card had a lot of potential, and it was easy to see that the card was one of the better ramp spells that's been printed in recent memory. However, this card was not showing up in top decks for a long time in Standard, and I think ultimately, all things considered, the power level was fine. It was good, but fine. And I think one of the things that really pushed it over the edge was just that Simic got so much other cool stuff as well. So, like, Oro showing up, I think just really pushed Growth Spiral over the edge. Just continuing to have, like, an excellent suite of ramp payoffs in Simic and colorless colors, so that it was just really easy to find good things to do with all of that mana. And then even just cards like Jolrail being printed took Growth Spiral from being, like, good, excellent in its archetype, to just being, like, a little bit too powerful. So I think ultimately Growth Spiral is dying for the sins of other cards and for the sins of just kind of play design and the direction it's been going. It reminds me a little bit of the Why can I never remember the name of this card? It was the energy card that fetched a land that gave you energy.
Attune with Aether.
Yeah, so it reminds me of the Attune with Aether ban. It's like that card was not busted. It's just that the whole apparatus around it was strong enough, and the direction that standard ended up going was strong enough that it was just a better idea to get rid of it. So that's kind of what it reminds me of there.
I think that the card should go anyway, regardless of the other things. If green and blue were suddenly weak colors, should this card still be around? I don't think so. And I think that the reason Aggro has such a hard time right now is because in the past, if you played a combination of Bant colors, whether it's green-blue or green-white or anything like that, you always had to balance that your early game wouldn't be very good. You could overwhelm your opponents in the mid-game and the late game, but your early game against Aggro is not good. You don't have cheap universal removal most of the time in this color set, so you will get run over by an Aggro deck. And Growth Spiral created a way for you to skip the early game entirely. You are just in the mid-game, and it's free. It doesn't even cost you a card. And I've already seen a ton of people saying that what they're going to do is take the Growth Spiral out of their deck and add Paradise Druid. Or they're going to add Wolf Willow Haven. And it's like, if that's your first response, then I think you're missing what made Growth Spiral so good. The point is, it
totally
never
agree. Yeah.
Yep, it never cost you a card. Yep. It was just a free skip to the mid game where you're favored anyway, and you're still it didn't cost you anything to get there except for turn 2, which was going to suck anyway because that's the colors that you played. So some people are going to throw in Paradise Druid, Wolf Willow Haven, but it always makes me laugh when people think that is basically saying the deck, whatever deck they were playing, whether Bant, Sultai, whatever ramp deck they were playing, it just needed a ramp spell. Mm-hmm. No, it's got a lot of ramp spells. Mm-hmm. This was just skip. It was time walk in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your opponent got to do something, but honestly, you took 2 turns.
Yeah. Well, and you're totally right. I think it highlights the fact that like we wouldn't see Bant control in this format. Like okay. So this format's been really interesting because we've seen like ramp control be an archetype, right? And like in the history of Magic, ramp control is, I mean, okay, I'm not like a Magic historian here, but ramp control just hasn't really been a thing, right? And the reason why we're seeing it here is just like you said, because it's free. It's because, you have Growth Spiral, you have Oro, these cards draw cards. Oro gains you life. Growth Spiral is an instant. They just like all of this stuff fits perfectly into the Control game plan. And Control wants to go long. Control wants to hit its land drops. One of the ways that Control wins is by having a lot of mana on the board, casting powerful spells, spending half of its mana drawing cards and half of its mana killing things. So the existence of cards like this is what makes these like kind of mid to long game Control decks with these big finishes possible. And I just want to finish up by saying like you're not like Bant is not going to start running Cultivate. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to see cards like this in the archetype. I mean, not unless there's some very specific game plan they're trying to enact. But in general, like they just don't want cards like that because it doesn't fit the mandate. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that the big question for this one is it the right ban? I think it should be banned, but it is interesting that you have a Growth Spiral banning, and you have, for only 1 mana more, a Growth Spiral that comes with 3 life and a 6/6 later in the game called Uro.
Yeah. I mean, that is the card which a lot of people are saying is missing from these bans. To be honest, my read on that is just that Oro is kind of like Oko. Oro is like 80% of Oko, and just like Oko, they're not willing to just unprint it from the game yet. Now, it could be that, we're going to see it banned in Modern, and then we're going to see it, etc. So we could just have the same kind of chain of bans go down when everyone realizes, yeah, this card's just a mistake and it shouldn't have been printed. But I think that they're still in the denial phase about Oro at the moment. That's my read.
My read is that actually the banning of Growth Spiral weakens Uro a significant amount. Because we've talked a lot with this about how free it is, that you just run like I have 2 videos this week where I play 30 lands in my decks.
Yeah.
Because I want to Growth Spiral and Uro and have it count. And because you get the free card draw, you're much less likely to flood or just find that 1 or 2 key cards that makes flooding fine, right? Now, that redundancy is diminished. You had 4 spirals and 4 Uros. You had a lot of payoff for drawing 5 to 6 to 7 lands in your first 10 cards. Now, if you draw 5 to 6 to 7 lands in your first 10 cards, but you don't draw your Uro, that's not very good.
No.
Like, you could definitely get beaten down for that. Like, definitely. And I think that's a big deal that people might not realize right away, that the payoff for having 28 to 30 lands, Uro is still good when you get that free Growth Spiral effect. It's pretty much broken when you get the free Growth Spiral effect. But now you're paying a cost for it, which is when you don't draw Uro, you're in trouble. Other times, you were definitely going to draw a Spiral or an Uro. It was just going to happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. And another important point here as well is just that I think that you were getting at in an indirect way, is that you can't start ramping on turn 3. Like, a deck that wants to ramp is just like, that's not when you want the party to get started. It's still possible that you could see Oro in like particular decks. Like, let's say that you have like some kind of Sultai control deck which does want to gain life, does want to keep drawing cards, does want to kind of get into their mid to end game where they do have a lot of lands. It's possible you'll still see it in decks like this, but I totally agree that it's weakened, and as a whole, like, the structure around it is weakened a lot.
Yeah. I think Uro is still going to be in a ton of decks, but I think those decks actually have to think about an early game, which they never even had to bother with in the past.
And it's so, along with the next ban that we're going to talk about as well, it's part of the reason why a lot of people are saying that spot removal is more likely to be playable now.
That's its own discussion.
Yeah. So let's get into this next one, Teferi Time Raveler being banned. I mean, we could certainly talk about this one, but I'm kind of wondering if there's anything we can say about it that hasn't already been said. What do you think about that?
It's unnerving that it took this long.
I'd agree with that.
Like somebody said, they sell packs. Dude, where are the Spark packs? We have been playing Magic that isn't Magic because of Teferi for over a year. I think the first couple days of playing with this card, people said it needed to be banned. There is a sentence. I'm going to read a sentence if I can find it really quickly here. This is from the ban announcement. This is written by Ian Duke of Wizards of the Coast. We've often heard the feedback that the repetitive play patterns and reduced capability for interaction that Teferi Time Raveler can create feel oppressive and limiting.
Yeah. This is like a no...
This is a known quantity, guys. This isn't new. This is like somebody from the mailroom just showed up and said, "Oh, I've just been stockpiling all these. Did you actually want these? This is the bundled hate mail for Teferi Time Raveler. Do you think you might do something about it now, when literally nobody wants to play the format anymore?" I love Teferi. Like I said, eulogy to Teferi. I think everybody wants to know, like, if I'm sad about Teferi because I put him in all my decks. I put him in my decks not because he's fun and interactive. I put him in my decks because it was stupid not to.
Yeah. It's like if you were playing the colors blue and white in your deck, you had to make an argument every time you didn't include Teferi in your deck.
Mm-hmm. And, a card that is that prohibitive, that just kind of nukes so many cards from even mattering. It's hard for me to think of a card that has just completely nuked cards out of existence like Teferi does. Yeah. All counter spells were close to unplayable, you know? It's like everybody's like on negate and mystical dispute because otherwise it just doesn't get under Teferi.
Right.
Every artifact, enchantment, or creature that cost 2 mana, because sometimes you're on the draw, or more, and didn't have an immediate enters the battlefield ability that was supremely relevant was completely useless if the opponent had Teferi. That's insane. That is actually insane. You can look at some stupid cards from the past, like Blood Moon and weird things like that. But in the modern era, I don't think any card has just invalidated or restricted deck building like Teferi. And it had, like, it's so weird to do it now, but they did. It's good. It happened. Why not 6 months ago?
Yeah.
We could have had so much fun.
Yeah. It's just, it's a time traveling issue, CGB. That's really what it came down to.
Yeah, of course.
You know, but it's true. It's like when I think about, okay, so Teferi's been such a watchdog in so many formats. And the problem with Teferi is that unlike some other watchdogs, there's basically no downside for playing it. It's like the same problem with Growth Spiral or Auro, right? It's like you just can't actually find the downside to playing the card, which is the problem. So, for example, let's talk about another card which watchdogs a lot of formats, which is Force of Will, right? Force of Will, it's an incredibly strong card. They're probably not going to print it into Standard anytime soon, you know, but it's a 2-for-1. Like, if you want to play that card in your deck, you have to be prepared to throw away 2 cards, right? And it's a severe cost. So it's like, okay, you still run it because it's still good, right? But that's one of the things that keeps a card like that in check, right? Now, let's say that Force of Will says draw a card on it, right? So you have to pitch.
Don't give them ideas. I don't like where this is going. Stop giving them ideas.
So Teferi Time Raveler for me is a little bit like if Force of Will had draw a card printed on it. And it's not a fully analogous comparison, but that's pretty much the reason why Teferi sucks. Like,
and this is another thing that I heard so much in my chat today is like, well, now people will play Baron, now people bring back Brazen Borrower. It's like, the bounce wasn't what you played Teferi for. No. Yeah, I mean, it was good. Like, it was definitely part of what was keeping Teferi in the game. But you're totally right. It's like it's like pretty much every part of Teferi was worth it, right? It's like you could remove any key line of text on Teferi and it still would have been a pretty good card. So the fact that it had, you know, basically like Teferi has 3 relevant things going on, right? The bounce effect is relevant, the card draw is relevant. I guess 4 in a way. Your opponent's not being able to play instant speed is relevant, and your ability to play sorcery spells at instant speed is also relevant. And so it's like you could have easily taken away any one of those aspects of the card, and it probably would have still been very playable. Having all of them on the same card is just mind-boggling. So, and then that combined with the high loyalty and it being a 3-mana planeswalker is just like, get out of here, basically. I think what's telling here, I don't think that banning Teferi Time Raveler ruins blue-white control.
No,
or any of the other, like it obviously it makes those decks weaker, but I think there's almost a relief to get to try something else with our 3 spot.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. It's kind of crazy. Like we can play counter spells now and not get brutally punished by our opponent for it. You know? Narset is still here if you want a planeswalker. So it's kind of amazing to be a blue-white mage without Teferi and think, this could be fun. That's how good the card is.
Yeah.
That's how good the card is. That's stupid.
It's just a relief to not have to play a card. I think that's it, you know? It's like, I just want to be in a format where I don't feel obligated to play a card.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that, like, Standard's been that way for a while. It's like, if you're playing the Simic colors, you're obligated to play 4x Growth Spiral and at least 3x Auro, right? And that's like, it's just, you're just a fool for leaving without those cards. What are you doing? Like, what are you even doing if you're not playing those cards? And that is just a problem. Like, Magic can't be like that, basically. It bothers me. And I think it's different than, someone might say, okay, well, you're always going to run Scavenging Ooze and you're 75 in green, right? That's different because those are cards that you bring in to target specific matchups, and they're cards that are put into the format specifically to police certain strategies and to basically make it so that you're like, okay, we can play these strategies in the format, and the only thing that allows that to still be fun and cool is that we have cards like Scavenging Ooze. So don't get those two mistaken. There are some cards which are very important to have in the format, which you will always run in your sideboard because they're specifically designed to keep Magic fun, right? To keep Magic fair, to keep things balanced. It's different than having cards that are like automatically a 4x of in your main deck, or that you automatically have to run because they're just the best cards. So I want to make that distinction very clear.
It's a good point. I hope we all followed that. But yes, just because a card is popular doesn't mean it doesn't have an important role. And then there are some cards that you just have to play because they're so stupidly good that you're a moron not to.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the final standard ban here. How familiar. The Cauldron Familiar, the everyone's favorite roasted cat. So there's a lot of people who've been saying that this was the card on the list that didn't necessarily need to go. A lot of people raising the eyebrows because Cauldron Familiar is just clearly in a different tier as far as power level is concerned. Like, you can't look at Cauldron Familiar and look at Teferi or Wilderness Reclamation and think that they have analogous power level. So why is it, CGB, that you and a lot of other people have been advocating for this card to get banned?
The lowbrow, no big brain, zero IQ reason is it's annoying.
Yeah. It is.
So I want to address that because I actually never thought this would come up in a ban announcement from Wizards of the Coast. But it literally says in the ban announcement, this again by Ian Duke, quote, "Further, the number of triggers generated by these decks can be cumbersome for both players in digital play."
Yeah.
That, unquote.
Yes.
What? What? You're banning cards for creating triggers now? What? Oh my goodness, we got new ban criteria, boys and girls. But I mean, that it's
they
true.
aren't wrong, right?
Yeah, they are not even close to wrong. And digital play has become magic because of COVID. And that was my point to chat. It's like there were people who were really upset with this ban. And it's like, how many minutes of your life and your opponents? How many minutes of all of our lives has been stolen by Cauldron Familiar Witch's Oven? Yeah. And I play it out. I play a lot of ranked, I've got to try to win the game. But if I'm in free play and my opponent plays a cat, the second they put an oven on the stack that I'm not about to destroy, I just scoop. Yeah, I can't be the only one. Like that. And I'm just not going to sit there and play that game in free play for no rewards other than the dailies. I can't be the only one. I'm sure they have data on this, right? Yeah. But that's the lowbrow reason, right? It's annoying. That shouldn't technically cause bans. Maybe in the modern world it should. I'm not going to argue that. But let's talk about what you said on power level, because I do think there's an argument to be made. The very first time I got the experience of cat and oven on the battlefield at the same time and realized that my opponent could block a creature, regardless of its size, put the cat in the oven, and then get the cat back. And I realize now it didn't matter if I had an impervious freaking great worm. Yeah. My opponent was winning, not me. Mm-hmm. All right? So every creature that doesn't have trample or flying is just invalidated by this freaking cat. And the life gain from the cat means that it's hard to race it the other way. Not only do you need another threat that the cat isn't blocking, it needs to be doing enough damage to race the drain one that they get for free every single turn.
Yeah.
And that is not just annoying, that is prohibitive. That it does make any deck built around creatures worse, significantly worse. And I think that is part of what's at play here. We talked about Teferi, how many cards it invalidated with its -3 ability. And I would argue that Cat Oven invalidates a tremendous amount of creatures. Mm-hmm. And I would also suggest, based on the banning of Fires and now the banning of Cauldron Familiar, I don't know, this might be controversial to some. I have this weird feeling that future R&D was forced to stop drafting and play some dang constructed in future formats, and we're like, wow, this actually is no fun whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Cat had a lot to do with it. And, if that's ban-worthy, if that's the thing, good, because there is another sentence. I was trying to figure out where to read it in here, but I did want to get it out there. It is actually, while they are talking about Pioneer, once again, Ian Duke from the ban announcement, quote, ultimately, how much fun players are having with the environment is the most important driving force behind BNR updates.
Yes.
I don't feel like that's always been true.
No.
And it makes me feel a little squishy to hear that. And I hope that they stick with it. And I think that there's a lot of players who like Cat Oven, but mostly because they're the ones cat ovening. Anybody who's played against it, I guarantee you would tell you this sucks. This absolutely sucks. And I'm really happy it's gone. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it needed to go, and it's like the sensei's divining top argument, right? It's like, it's not necessarily that this thing was like the most powerful, the most broken, the biggest problem, but we just we want to be able to get through games of Magic, and we want to be able to do it before either player is actually dead in the real world. So yeah, I think just the time.
That's morbid, dude.
Time. You know what I mean? It's like when you see those memes of like that skeleton sitting on the park bench or whatever. It's like, that's how I felt playing against some of these decks. And one of the things that supremely bothered me about playing these Cat Oven decks is they had to keep playing the game even after they had lost, because they were never ever 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 dead until they were actually dead. Right? It's like,
oh my god, yeah.
It's so tilting to look at your board, to look at your opponent's board, and to be like, I've got this game locked up. But if they go another oven into a top decked Mayhem Devil, they might still kill me, And it was just so annoying to have to just play all of these games to the death, And
dude. I'm telling you right now, I was already looking into the rotation version of Jund Cat.
Yeah.
It loses Mayhem Devil, right? And
yeah.
That's what everybody's like, oh, it's going to lose Mayhem Devil. This will be fine. This is not fine.
No.
Because you know what happens when you lose Mayhem Devil? You lose the thing that ended the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
So the new Jund... Yeah, I was playing with it, and it's you sub in a lot of Murderous Riders, and you sub in Massacre Girl, and now you just don't even try to win the game. You just grind until you've put your whole freaking deck in your hand, and your core Volt is a 20/20, and then you attack.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was taking forever to play that deck, and I guarantee if anybody actually worked on that, they were like, "This is not good."
Yeah, and I just think that it's annoying that. Okay, so you can answer Cauldron Familiar. You can do a number of things. You can play Scavenging Ooze. You can play Grafdigger's Cage. You can do a number of things, right? You can even play something like Cry of the Carnarium. But the problem is that having to substantially warp your main deck or your sideboard strategy around just one dumb little one-drop cat, it's a tilt. It's just annoying, and it's especially since. So if you bring in Cage against a graveyard deck, your graveyard decks of old, it's kind of like, okay, the whole deck is a graveyard deck. And so it kind of makes sense that I have to sideboard against it, right? Is this deck, like, are these sack decks even necessarily graveyard decks? No, not necessarily. They're sacrifice decks, right? It's like, if they can't get their Woe Strider back from the graveyard, they can still win. If you bring in the Cage against the Cat, they can still win. It's not the central theme of their deck. So having to bring in sideboard cards against the deck that aren't even necessarily that good is a problem. So I think that that's one of the reasons why cards like Cauldron Familiar are so bad for the game, is that, like, your deck can just truck along just fine without having access to the familiar. And I think that that's just part of why it's been so warping. But yeah, I mean, I like just the whole constellation, right? The time, the fun, the play patterns, it all adds up to being, yeah, I think that this card should be banned. I'm really glad they did it. And frankly, I'm just super glad I'm not going to have to put up with it for the next year. Like, they mentioned that in the article, and I think that that's 50% of it. They were just like, people are already tired of this card. So, yeah. So,
Rip kitty.
You were a good kitty.
No. Bad kitty.
You know, plenty of people are going to be shedding a tear today over the familiar. So, all right, so let's talk about what does this allow us? Like, what do we think Standard's going to look like moving forward?
So the first thing I always want to look at is, what are the cards that are borderline or completely busted that were already succeeding, and where do they fit? And I came up with 4 of them, and the first is Nissa.
Nissa, of course.
The Shaker of the World.
She's
the second.
She's the Gideon ally Zendikar, by the way, of this standard. Yeah. She's just dodges every ban somehow.
Yep. The second is Uro, who we touched on a little bit.
Yep.
Probably still one of the more overall stat-wise busted cards available. And those two can kind of hang out together, as I'm sure we're going to get to, because what's better than a Nissa? Ramp into Nissa.
Yeah.
The third is Embercleave. Just the ultimate get 'em dead play. And I'm really curious if that card is significantly better or worse, and maybe we'll get into that. And the fourth is probably a good starting point. Your favorite, Winota.
Yeah, that's where I was looking, man. And so Michael Jacob actually tweeted about this when he saw this announcement. He was like, Winota seems to be conspicuously absent from this ban list, and that's definitely one of the places I'm going to start. Like, because the Madu Winota deck didn't lose anything from these bannings, and deck's strong, deck just top-8'd. It's got a lot of play, and I could definitely see decks like that putting up solid results.
I just bumped my microphone cable. Do I still sound okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay. Apparently it messed something up on stream earlier.
Now, one of the things that people have been saying in rebuttal to that is that just due to Reclamation being gone and due to Teferi being gone, people are saying that spot removal is likely to become a little bit more relevant. And so, Winota decks might take a hit as a result of that. One thing I just want to say, though, is that this particular Winota deck doesn't necessarily care that much if Winota gets sniped. It still does just fine without her. And I think that the combination of... Okay, so if you're playing Loxodon and Winota in the same deck, as well as Basri's Lieutenant, like, there's a reasonable possibility that you might actually end up with a Winota with a counter on it. And that, that would invalidate things like Heartless Act, for example. And you also might end up in a situation where Winota dies, but you still get a knight, something like that. And so, yeah, this is also, okay, so when Winota was making waves in Historic, you had all these people saying the same thing. It was like, just play removal. It's easy. Just get rid of Winota. What's the big deal?
Oh, yeah. Some people said sweep, dies to one sweeper in the chat today, which I had to tell them about the game you saw that we talked about on the last podcast.
Yeah. Which is people saying that, I'm like, how many matches have you played against a good Winota deck? So, yeah, it's not that simple, people, is what it comes down to. And I don't know. It's kind of like saying, just counter Wilderness Reclamation. What's your problem, right?
Yep.
Well, just play. Teferi is not a problem. Just play Questing Beast. What's the big deal? It's like, how much have you really considered that line of reasoning?
Do we need to have the spot removal talk?
I think now's a good time.
Okay, because it's going to have a huge impact on the future of Standard, because we've been in this world for a while where spot removal is bad, because every single card trades with another card, and spot removal is basically like going down one card, because if you kill their Hydroid Krasis or their Uro, they already got value.
Yeah.
And that was primarily that argument. Also, against Wilderness Reclamation, what are you doing with spot removal in your deck? You're going to kill their Shark token? They got a card out of that too.
Yeah.
So, with these bannings, is it actually all right to play cards like Heartless Act in your deck right now? And we talk about the 4 cards I mentioned. 2 of them, Embercleave and Winota, certainly seem to be just make your ears ring, right? You should play some spot removal. That would be good. And then the other 2 cards, Nissa and Uro, very much seem to at least speak to me saying, not so fast.
No.
Because spot removal isn't going to be particularly great against either one. Both are 2-for-1s. And it's going to be interesting to see which way the format goes. Do the Nissa Uro decks, in order to beat the aggressive decks, do they need spot removal to bridge the gap? I think they might. I was definitely leaning that way near the end of the format with decks like Sultai and Bant, where I actually wanted cards like Glass Casket and Heartless Act and Eliminate. I think Eliminate's terrible now because there's no Teferi to worry about, but Heartless Act might be really good and Tyrant Scorn still might be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is going to be the tug-of-war of the format. Without question. And whether or not spot removal is good really depends. Can Nissa, Hydroid Krasis, Uro, Shark Typhoon, can they hold their own? Now that, against the next wave of aggression? Because I would say this whole ban announcement, to me, favors aggression. In my opinion. Yep. The Cat Oven Drain, if you've ever played aggro against a Witch's Oven Cauldron Familiar, you know how much harder the game is. From the second those 2 are on the battlefield together, it's oh, jeez. And I would say that Mono Green might have been a premier aggro deck because it had access to Trample and an easy way to kill the Oven in Gemrazor, which was hard to find. Embercleave was necessary to trample over the Cat, which is why Mono Red tried to hang in there along with Gruul. But the Cat getting banned is huge for aggro. Teferi getting banned, Teferi wasn't always your best card against aggro, but it was never good, and it did limit what you should play. Hunted Nightmare was a card a lot of people laughed at because of Teferi, and the card still managed to make a splash. So there's a lot to still be said for that. But maybe now not every single 2-drop you play in your deck has to have haste. It's possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe we can play some powerful cards. Maybe Rada gets some play. I don't know. But Teferi being banned definitely helps aggro, and I think it helps spot removal. And this is why. Because I think this is a little counterintuitive. People forget about the tempo of Teferi. When you make the commitment to, my opponent's probably going to play something I need to kill, so I'm going to keep mana open instead of doing something else I could do to hold up, say, a Murderous Rider. And your opponent plays Teferi. Well, on your turn, you can kill the Teferi, but you wasted that 3 mana. You don't get that 3 mana back. You still have to pay it. And that tempo and that punishing you for even having spot removal in your deck that Teferi can do was a big deal.
Yeah. That's it. It's these decks routinely get up to a lot of mana very quickly. And then they can just, if they're worried about you leaving up mana for removal, they just run out Teferi first, right? And then they're like, okay, Teferi comes down. I know that I can get my Nissa down. I know that I get one activation out of my Nissa. I know that I can, bring back Oro from the graveyard. I know that I can do all of these things. And yeah, my opponent is going to get taxed if they want to answer me. So yeah, Teferi there are all of these little edge cases where Teferi is just continually making people's lives more difficult, continually making just interactions that used to matter in Magic matter a lot less. So yeah, I think that Teferi being gone, frankly, makes every archetype better.
Yeah, not just control, not just mid-range, but I think it does make aggro better. And I think the other things even more so, right? Growth Spiral, now they have to play an early game, right?
Right. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to mention this while it's fresh on my mind. So there's a few things specifically about aggro that get a lot harder when Teferi's gone. So the first thing is you now no longer have to play that dance of... Okay, this happened a lot in aggro, where you would have these pivotal turns of the game where you were like, I really want to go face, but I need to kill Teferi. And the reason is that if I don't kill Teferi, next turn they can tick it up, and now I have to worry about getting wrathed in the middle of my combat step on the following turn, right? And that was like such a key tension with Teferi, and you'd often find yourselves in these situations where you like mono green, great example. You would have an opponent's Teferi on 2 loyalty, and on your side of the battlefield, you have a human token and a Lovestruck Beast. And you're like, I just don't know if I can afford to not hit my opponent for 6 here, right? But I also can't afford to not kill Teferi, because the following turn I might just get horribly blown out if I want to play my Questing Beast, if I do have a haste threat, right? So it just put all of these constraints on the way that you played the game in a way that almost no other Planeswalker did. And, there are other Planeswalkers that you could just ignore. You could be like, all right, if I let Narset live, my opponent will get another card, but I think it's worth it to just smack their face and get the game over with. Or even some other more powerful Planeswalkers. It's kind of like, if that Planeswalker is not specifically invalidating my aggro plan, I might actually be able to ignore it. I might be able to leave my opponent's Tameo alone. Stuff like that. But Teferi was just one of those cards that it interacted so favorably with your creature and your aggro plan that you just couldn't really afford to leave it around.
Yeah, that's all good points. That's true.
Yeah.
Yep. And aggro decks not having to worry about that anymore. I think that does make aggro good. The natural progression of a format when there's a shakeup, whether it's rotation or a massive banning, is that people try a lot of stuff that didn't work before, and a lot of those untuned decks get exposed for why they didn't work, because other people just play more aggro and they just smash those decks. They just attack them brutally. So I think no matter what, aggro is going to spike in what is played in the coming weeks. And then it's going to be interesting to see if aggro stays top tier, which it hasn't been for some time. But without Jund to completely hold it down, or at least they don't have the cat oven, and without Growth Spiral to skip the early play, I think it's really possible that aggro is very good now. I think that that's something to watch out for. And I'm always down for that, because wherever there are good aggro decks, you can tune a control deck to beat it. So it's exciting for me. I do wonder if mid-range actually is back, or if mid-range is still going to run into the same problem that Nissa, Krasis, Uro just go over the top. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or Yorion, Blink just goes over the top, or Ugin just goes over the top. I still don't believe in a traditional sensed mid-range right now.
It's true, although I will note that... All right, so I think the lack of cards like Growth Spiral, the lack of cards like Teferi, it does make resource denial a little bit more plausible, because one of the biggest one of the biggest challenges to, like, for example, the Orzhov deck, right? The Orzhov Yorion deck that was trying to like make you discard cards and tax and stuff like that was actually quite weak to Teferi, because Teferi could come down, draw you a card. Then later in the game, you play an Elspeth Conquers Death, exiling your opponent's Yorion. And then you get Teferi back and you draw another card. And I think that Teferi was one of the cards that was really holding back some of these other mid-range decks that might want to kind of empty out your hand and try to take over control of the game that way. So I don't know. It's not that I think that strategy immediately sounds better, but I do think that some of the format's key card advantage engines in the form of Teferi and Growth Spiral being gone, I think that does account for something.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if mid-range can hang. Do you think it can stop a deck with Uro and Nissa and Krasis? I mean, that's still a ton of cards that you get just for having these in your deck.
So one of the things I'm most curious about is I wonder if like a Super Frenzy strategy might be a little bit more possible now. Because, you know, okay, so these Super Frenzy control decks have historically had a reasonable game against aggro. And I think one of the things that was keeping them out of the format, so we saw a lot of these decks in like War of the Spark, for example. You had like just various permutations of, and I don't know, maybe Teferi was holding those decks together, so maybe that's just not a thing anymore. But one of the reasons that decks like that got hated out of the format is that it was Wilderness Wreck was just more powerful. Fires was just more powerful. Doubling all of your mana was just more powerful. Now, if the only realistic way to actually double your mana is Nissa, and you have answers to Nissa, I think it's possible that we could see some kind of like bolus style control decks come up. And I don't know, maybe that's the kind of a deck that could, over the course of a medium to long game, actually keep up with these Simic decks in terms of card advantage, and also have enough answers to hold down cards like Nissa, right? So I mean, that's just totally off the top of the dome. I don't know, but I kind of imagine that style of deck got a little bit of a boost out of this announcement.
You sound like a Grixis mage. Dude, they always think that somehow they're going to hold down this stuff. I'm not a buyer yet.
Nope.
You can't call me a buyer on that yet.
I mean, it's definitely a hot take, and I'm definitely not staking my reputation on it, but I think that deserves being explored, for sure.
By definition, a hot take is something you stake your reputation on. Sorry to inform you. I wish you still liked mono green, dude. Mono green's slapping right now.
Yeah, dude. Mono green's sick.
Mm-hmm. You know what people ask me? Can I just throw some at you? Because I did the stream today and people were just throwing decks at me.
Yeah.
I want to know what you think.
Yeah, lay them on me.
Because I shared my opinion, but I just want to bounce these. The biggest one that people will not stop saying is going to be great is the new baddie, is the new enemy. Like, they're afraid to fire up Arena right now because of this deck. What do you think? Do you want to predict? Do you want to take a shot? Can you guess?
I mean, the first deck that came to my mind was Teamer Adventure.
You know, that one's really high on the list,
yeah.
But I don't think it's quite the villain yet.
Okay.
No, it's Simic Flash. Simic Flash.
Dude, people need to get over it, man. Like... People, look, I understand. I've lost to that deck. You've lost to that deck. You know what else has happened a lot? I've also beaten that deck. Simic Flash is one of those decks where when it's winning against you, it looks good and it feels really bad. And when it's not, you're just crushing them. Like, that's all I've got to say. People listen to the Arjuna man right now. The deck can be good. The deck has never, ever, ever, ever been, like, consistently tier 1 in standard, ever. Like, Okay.
That's true.
Seth Manfield frickin' spiked a tournament with it. I know. It's like had a couple of other top finishes in some random tournaments. I know. The deck has never been capital T tier 1 ever. I just I don't get it. I honestly don't get it.
I think it's just the scourge of free play.
Probably what it is.
It's one of those where you don't. It's annoying because at least if they play turn 1 Witch's Oven or turn 1 Flourishing Fox, you're like, scoop, new opponent. Against Simic Flash, you don't know until your first spell is countered, and then you're always like, well, maybe they'll miss a land drop, or maybe they won't have 2 counters, but they always do.
Yeah.
Always.
Well,
but this.
Sorry. Okay, I wanted to mention one thing real quick. So one of the benefits that Simic has had specifically, Simic Flash has had on the ladder, is that you never knew, like, okay, your opponent plays turn 1, they play like a breeding pool, right? Turn 2, they play a forest, and they say go. And you're playing your deck, and you're like, all right, I am either playing against some kind of Simic X rampy control-y deck, or I'm playing against Flash. And you're in this position where you're like, cast my 2-drop? And they play Growth Spiral, and you're like, oh, thank God, it's probably a ramp deck, right? But you never really know. They could untap with 4 mana, say go, you cast a 3-drop, and all of a sudden it's rewind, you know? So that was one of the benefits that Simic Flash had on the ladder, is that you never really knew playing against them what it was going to be until maybe like turn 4 or turn 3. And now if your opponent goes, breeding pool into forest, go, you're like, no, that's a quench. Like, that's a quench, bro, because like it's not going to be Growth Spiral. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, the element of surprise is kind of gone, but it's worth mentioning. I mean, just because it's a quench and not a Growth Spiral or a Wildborn Preserver or a Brazen Cutthroat or whatever, Simic actually did lose its best draw. This was, in the good versions, a Growth Spiral deck.
Yes.
Because it could play turn 3, rewind, ambusher. Like, it lost its god draw.
Yeah.
And if aggro is going to be on the upswing for a considerable amount of time, which I think is 100% going to be the case, you know what Simic Flash just rolls over to? 1-drop.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Knights of the Ebon Legion, taste it.
Good. And on the spot removal question, spot removal is great against Simic Flash,
yes.
Especially instant speed spot removal. Instant speed stuff like Heartless Act is great at just kill your Nightpack ambusher when you go for it.
It feels so good. It feels so good when they tap out. They tap out with their 4-mana ambusher and you just gun it down.
Yep.
Chef's
It's not as simple as Teferi got banned and now Simic Flash is broken. Like, Teferi was good against them, but it never resolved anyway. The way I put it on stream, every deck had a Teferi-ish card that they had to counter. It always came down to could they counter it or not. So that didn't change anything. If anything, Simic Flash loses in this, in my opinion. They lose the Growth Spiral, and they lose basically the 1-drop aggro decks get so much better, in my opinion. So they're going to lose this war of attrition. It's a meta deck. It has been a meta deck. Simic Flash will be a meta deck. It needs the right meta to thrive.
I agree. Although I will say that it did lose one of its most feared predators in the form of the Cat Oven. I think the Cat Oven combo and these Rakdos and John decks were actually some of the better decks against the Flash decks. So that's a matchup it doesn't have to worry about anymore, I think.
That's true. But I think that goes even better for control decks, which I think
I would agree
the
with
Cat
that.
Oven was a pure scourge of theirs.
Yes.
They just could not stop the aggression.
Yes.
So, I mean, Teferi might be gone, but now I can play an Absorb and not be embarrassed,
So I think you bring up a good point, which is I think control has been one of the archetypes that gains the most from this ban announcement. Like, because control has basically hated playing against. I mean, okay, 3 out of the 4 cards on this ban list have been very good against control. So Wilderness Reclamation was actually a deck that has long been considered to be fairly weak against control. It did, of course, it got a lot of really excellent tools against control, like Shock Typhoon, and it can play its own counter spells and stuff like that. But again, like, it can't, now that it can't growth spiral, that severely weakens Wilderness Rex ability to kind of keep up with control. And I don't know, like, control, that there are a lot of random control decks that don't want to play white that just got a massive bump from Teferi being removed from the format, so that's really awesome. And yeah, control doesn't have to play against Cauldron Familiar anymore, so I think control's, I don't know, I would definitely be looking at control and considering like what else you can do. So okay, yes, Azorius Mages specifically took a hit with Teferi Time Raveler, but I just think that there are a lot of options that have actually opened up for control now.
Oh boy, you're going to be one of those. Grixis!
Okay.
Grixis!
Look.
I see it. I can feel it.
Look.
I can feel it.
I can't actually be a Grixis fanboy until they print some kind of playable land that actually lets you play Grixis in Standard. So that's the start of the conversation.
Okay,
all right?
Okay. You got it.
Give me my Triome. I just want a Grixis Triome, dude.
Always do. They do Grixis dirty, man. They're just here to do Grixis dirty.
They don't give a fluff, man. All right. So yeah, let's talk about, like, let's get into the Standard tier list a little bit and just like what we think could be some of the stronger archetypes emerging out of this announcement. So we've already discussed Simic Flash. I think a lot of people are thinking about Teamer Adventure. What's your take on how that's going to be positioned in this meta game?
Teamer Adventure had a Mayhem Devil problem that is mostly going to be solved. But Teamer Adventure, in my opinion, still has a Nissa problem that is unsolved.
That's a good point.
Spot removal is both good and bad against Teamer Adventure, depending on how well they're playing and how much they need to hit their land drops. Like, if they get forced to play an early Edgewall Innkeeper and you get to spot removal it, that's really good. But if they're smart and they slow roll that sucker until like turn 7, when they can also draw multiple cards when you tap low, then it's, spot removal against them is straight up bad because all their cards are 2-for-1s or more.
Yeah.
And I still don't see an easy way to kill a Clover other than Gemrazor.
No.
But Gemrazor is probably more played now than it was at any other point in Standard right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if now is a good time to be a Clover mage. Like, I played against Teamer Clover a few times today. They had a really hard time with like Stone Coil into Troll, into Gemrazor, into Questing Beast, into Ram Through. Like that, they just, even with a Lovestruck Beast, they felt so far behind if it got removed, right? So I'm not convinced. I think that the Adventure deck is good, but I'm not sold yet.
I think overall it benefited, and I don't think it benefited from any of these specific bans so much as it's just a very good deck, and some of the other top tier decks got nerfed, and just so by default Teamer Adventure not getting nerfed just bumped it up the list a little bit, right? Like,
of course, yeah.
So I think by default it's better now than it was in the past, but that's just kind of in a vacuum, and it's possible that some other archetypes are going to rise up and kind of keep it from being a tier 1 deck. I mean, it's just funny because if you talk to Aaron Gertler, it probably never stopped being a tier 1 deck, right? But I think that, like, for the average player, it's been deprecated in favor of some of these other strategies for a long time. But I mean, yeah, I think overall it got a boost, and it's definitely going to be one of the decks that I'm going to be looking to. I'm just going to be looking at it and seeing if it is viable in the new Standard format, because it's definitely a possibility. One of the things I want to note is for any of you people playing Growth Spiral in Teamer Adventure who might think that Teamer Adventure is not going to be as good without Growth Spiral, you're wrong. I
didn't know this actually happened.
Yeah.
Are you sure this is real?
I've had a lot of conversations with people. I've had a lot of conversations with people about Teamer Adventure who think various parts of the deck are bad and should be removed. Like, This is the byline on Teamer Adventure. There are 2 flex slots in the main deck. All right, 2. There are 2 flex slots in the main deck. They are not adventure creatures. They are not Edgewalling Keeper. They are obviously not the Growth Spiral. I mean the Clover, right? So these are the kind of places where people were playing Growth Spiral and thinking that it was kind of good. But like Growth Spiral is not your plan in this deck. Beanstalk Giant is your plan in this deck. Escape to the Wilds is your plan in this deck. So I just like I want to put this out there. Like anyone who's messing with this deck list and thinking that they're improving it by like adding, like I added 2 Nisses to the deck, it's better, or I whatever, like whatever modification you're making to the deck, it's wrong. Don't do it. You have 2 flex slots. Pick the cards that go there. Be done with it. All right, we can move on.
All right.
That's my rant. That's my Teamer Adventure rant.
Yeah. Well, welcome to our band podcast where we will be ranting about the 2 flex spots in Teamer Adventure. Go on.
All right, so that's Teamer Adventure. Okay, so let's just like as a whole, let's talk about monocolor aggro decks here. So general consensus is aggro's been getting a little bit better from this ban. You seem to think that mono green is pretty well positioned here. And I saw you playing a little bit on stream. Do you have any more thoughts about that deck in particular?
Yes. And that's it. Just yes.
Okay, excellent.
Deck is really good.
Move along.
Deck is really good. If spot removal is better, more ram through, more primal might, most of my matchups came down to who had more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, good cards.
And I thought Growth Chamber Guardian was terrible, but we all, you almost. I was trying to come up with something to make you spit out your water, but apparently that one doesn't faze him.
Vindication, sweet vindication.
No. I only think that there's 2 mono. You said we're going to talk about them together. I only think the real contenders are green and red.
Okay, so you don't think mono black still like was mono black just a contender in the format because it had a good reclamation matchup? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think discard for disruption is the way to be anymore.
Interesting.
And I think that hurts the deck.
That's an interesting take. Do you really think it got worse even though Growth Spiral and Teferi have been removed from the format?
Yeah, I think that if Duress and Freebooter aren't winning games for you, if they're mostly in the way, and now you run a little bit of spot removal, but that's very reactive. It doesn't do anything if your opponent's playing Wraths and things like that. And if your alternative to up your power level involves cards like Demonic Embrace and Regisaur, that plays into spot removal, which got better in other places and is better against you. Yeah, I don't think that they're better off. I think Mono Black is worse off. If anything, I think Mono Black should... If spot removal is good, I think Mono Black shouldn't be aggro. It should probably be trying mid-range. Dust off your gray merchants. See if that works.
That's an interesting take to me. I mean, okay, I will agree with you insofar as this is concerned that I think that Mono Black is and has been for a long time a very meta aggro deck. Like I think you can sleeve up just like a lean and mean linear red aggro deck or green aggro deck and just have a strong proactive game plan and have that be enough. Whereas I do think that Mono Black hasn't... Its linear aggro plan hasn't been quite as good, and so in order for it to proliferate in the format, it has needed to make smart meta calls. And that's one of the nice things about Black is that Black has, it has disruption, it has removal, it has some of these excellent sideboard cards which the other monocolored decks don't have access to. So I definitely agree with you insofar as it being kind of like a what's the word? It's a shape-shifting deck. It's a deck that's been able to kind of change its form to keep up with the shifts in the meta, which is really cool. So I think that it has lost one of its best matchups at least. But I don't know. I mean, I think so it still has some of the better aggressive one-drops in the format in the form of Knight of the Ebon Legion and Gutter Bones. And those cards are going to be very good against decks like Simic Flash, for example. So if that deck does get played more, it's going to be good. Also, those cards, I think in particular, struggled against the Cat Oven decks, and that format is gone. So I don't know. I'm curious as to whether cards like Hunted Nightmare, cards like Rotting Regisaur, and stuff like that are actually going to line up pretty well against the other aggro decks in the format, for example. I think that could be a spot for Mono Black.
I think you're right, and I don't think it will be a very good spot.
Well, okay, so let me ask you this. It seems like Mono Red aggro is going to be at least tryable, so you should try it. Mono Green aggro, I agree with you, I think is well positioned. Do you think Mono White is just going to disappear entirely? Like, was that also just a deck that was preying on the Reclamation?
I think you should try the life gain version.
Interesting.
It's been a long time, but I think that was a deck that, like, think about Cauldron Familiar against a Johnny's Pridemate. Think about Teferi against Heliod and a Johnny's Pridemate. I think that was a deck that was suffering.
Interesting.
From the meta. Also, think about just Growth Spiral into anything against that deck. It was a deck that played cards that didn't immediately affect the battlefield. It set up and then did powerful things. Mm-hmm. So I think the life gain version should get another try.
Okay, that's an interesting take. I mean, yeah, especially if people are playing cards like Heartless Act, I think that deck has a very strong matchup against Heartless Act specifically. And, you know, it could be weak to cards like Eliminate or Sweepers. So it kind of depends on what removal people are playing in the format, because that deck is weak in general to just efficient removal and Sweepers. But it does have resilience in the form of Heliod and the Ajani Planeswalker, which can actually get it through in certain matchups. So, okay, I buy that. Also, I just derived some satisfaction in hearing you, of all people, endorse the life gain deck, CGB. Dude, to destroy a monster, you may have to become one.
Like,
I love
who wins the mono green fight, right? The biggest creature? Pridemate and Heliod make huge creatures.
Yeah, that's
huge.
True. I think white does have a fairly good mono green matchup.
Yeah. So give that another look, I think. But I mean, I still think green and red are the shining stars here. Green doesn't have a particularly broken card. It just has the best rates.
Yeah,
probably it feels like in Magic history. Just 1 mana 4/4. Pelt Collector.
Yeah.
2 mana 3/3, 3 mana 4/4. Mm-hmm. Sometimes bigger if it's a Gem Raiser.
Yeah.
4 mana Stat Ball, Questing Beast.
Yeah, and don't forget the 3 mana 5/5. That guy's a house.
Yeah, he is a house.
Yeah.
So I think green is legit. I think that mono red still has Embercleave. It still has Annex Embercleave. Sometimes that just wins.
Mm-hmm. Torbrand, still a good card.
Yep. So I would start there and see how other decks stack up to that would be my priority. I will tell you, I played against on ladder today multiple times. I think it was the same player, but it was interesting. It was Conclave Mentor. Do I have your attention now?
I'm with you.
Conclave Mentor.
You had me at con.
Neoform.
Okay, Neoform. Interesting.
Which puts a counter on things.
Right.
Winota.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Basri's Lieutenant, which puts counters on things.
So this is a 4-color deck, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So were they running, like, Gilded Goose?
Yes.
Okay. So 4-color Winota might be back. So how about the Elephant? Were they running the Elephant?
I assume so. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
I would play it 100% with Grazer, Goose, and Conclave Mentor.
Yeah, I mean, that card's busted with Mentor for sure. Okay, I dig it. I did some dabbling with 4-color Winota back, when that was a thing, and looked somewhat promising.
Yeah, I think that the blue is only for the Neoform.
Yeah.
And that the rest of the deck is Naya Winota with Basri's Lieutenant Conclave Mentor, so that the +1/+1 synergy is stronger on its own.
Yeah, that is actually kind of a cool take, because the Mentor is a non-human card. So I'm digging it. To me, it still sounds weaker than the Mardu version, but definitely worth trying.
The Mardu version, so is that deck tier 1? Jim Davis won the Gen Con Standard Championship over the weekend running Michael Jacobs' almost card-for-card list. There were a few changes. The deck is starting to take up big meta shares in the SCG qualifier events. A student of mine showed me some results with over an 80% win rate in Mythic across 20 matches. The deck is starting to get widespread respect. And it wasn't touched by bans. Yeah.
It's good, dude. I've taken that deck for a few spins. It is good. And I haven't played this deck with Basri's Lieutenant, but I was playing a Conclave Mentor deck with Basri's Lieutenant, and let me tell you, that card is also good.
Did it get better? I think that's the question. Did it get better with the bannings?
I absolutely think it did. Teferi Time Raveler was one of the reasons to not play that card. I also don't think it was particularly relevant in the Reclamation matchup. But yeah, I
think Growth Spiral's the big one, right? Just
could be.
The skipping that early game and getting into the Elspeth Conquers Death, Nissa Who Shakes the World part of the game. I think that was Mardu Winota's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
I think that being gone is green light.
It is, dude. I mean, so Basri's Lieutenant, here's the thing about Basri's Lieutenant, right? It's excellent against anyone running sweepers. So has a pretty good control matchup, and now that Teferi's gone, it's not going to get bounced. The thing you put a counter on is not going to get bounced, so that's great. Still weak to ECD, but ECD is a lot worse without Teferi. So, I think, I mean, who knows? But I think that's a strong argument to be playing it against control. Now, in an aggro matchup, the person with Basri's Lieutenant typically wins the head-to-head because every trade that you make, you get a creature and your opponent doesn't. And you don't need to make that many favorable trades in the aggro matchup before you're just absolutely crushing your opponent. So it blanks your opponent's removal. It makes combat a nightmare for them. Sometimes the protection from multicolored is relevant. So it's just a house in aggro matchups. So I don't know. It's what is it truly weak against? Maybe Flash? But
I want to have a note. I actually think it would be fine against Flash. It just swarms the battlefield.
Sure.
But I want to say Elspeth Conquers Death. This was a card that was on my list. We talked about the 4 broken cards. I did have a 5th one, and it was Elspeth Conquers Death.
Yeah.
After thinking about it, I cut it because it costs 5 mana now.
Yeah. It does.
Playing Elspeth Conquers Death on turn 4 or turn 3 is way different than playing it on turn 5. When you actually have to invest your whole turn into the card, it's pretty easy. If you spend 5 mana to take out a threat that costs 3 or 4, the opponent can still tempo you out brutally.
Yeah.
Mono green, sometimes you exile that questing beast, they're like, thanks, I had another.
Exactly.
and you're just dead. So I don't think ECD is busto anymore. And we'll see if that turns out to be true or not. But what do you think of that, as I know you hate the card?
I hate the card. Okay, for me, the banning of Teferi is 100. That is okay, so Growth Spiral is definitely a weakener on that card. But I think Teferi banning hits that card even harder. ECD has a hidden line of text on it, which basically says, when this spell enters the battlefield, search a library for Teferi and put it in the graveyard, right? What percentage of ECDs have resolved that didn't have a Teferi in the graveyard to get back? So that little wombo combo is not available anymore. What cheap planeswalker, Narset is the only cheap planeswalker I can think of that might reliably be in the graveyard when you resolve your ECD, and that card's probably about at its worst right now, right? Like, I think Narset took a pretty big hit from these bans. What do you think?
Yes. Narset is not a good card. It's a fine card, but not a great card if there is any creature larger than a 1/1 on the battlefield when you play it. Yeah. Because you're spending 3 mana to gain 2 life and cast Impulse, which isn't mind-blowingly good. It still has a warping effect on control mirrors, but it's not that hard to deal with when all's said and done, I think. And yeah, Narset ain't what it used to be.
Nope. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that ECD has taken a big hit, and frankly, that's fine. Like, I think my guess is that the power level of ECD right now is probably commensurate to where they were kind of thinking it was going to be in testing, and I don't think that it is a problematic card when you don't have these, like, beautiful shells around it that are just making it so incredible. Like... okay, so like after rotation, how many like playable, consistent 3-mana planeswalkers are going to be in standard? I can't think of one. Like
after rotation.
After rotation.
Can I interest you in some Royal Scions?
Okay. I'm feeling it.
No,
hey.
I was being sarcastic.
Well, you can interest me. That's a card which I've always wanted to be playable, which hasn't been. But who knows? You know, Royal Scions could actually gain post-rotation. Probably not. Okay, probably not. But, yeah, interesting.
I know.
Lay it on.
You know those flex slots in Teamer Adventures?
Yeah.
Royal freaking Scions, baby.
Oh, baby.
We did it. We did it.
You know what I'm curious about? I'm curious about Teamer Scions with Joel Rail.
Oh, boy. Here it comes.
Like, I don't know, man. Couldn't it be beautiful?
I think that one of the issues in the format is going to be, 1, how much Bonecrusher Giant is played, and 2, do we now have to evaluate every single card based on does it die to Bonecrusher Giant?
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah,
I mean...
I think that there's a significant chance it's a big deal.
Yeah? You think that card specifically gained a lot?
I think that if aggro decks are going to gain and more people are going to run it, and if adventure decks gain and more people are going to run it, Bonecrusher is both a good card for aggro decks to win aggro mirrors. It's never dead, even if they're against control. It's a fine card. It's kind of a 2-for-1. Sometimes it's like 8 damage attached to it because of the ability, and it gets 1 attack in, whatever. But Bonecrusher Giant's a great card no matter what matchup you're in, but it gets significantly better when aggro is better because it's good in aggro and against aggro.
Yeah.
And if everybody has Bonecrusher, then cards that die to Bonecrusher get just... it's bad. It's just really bad if your card comes down, does nothing, and dies to Bonecrusher.
Yeah. It is specifically a very good card against mono green. So if that is the premier aggro deck in the format, then I think Bonecrusher is going to gain a lot. Yeah, I mean...
where do cards like Ranger's Guile fall for you now without Teferi?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good question. I think it's more... Okay, so Ranger's Guile in, like... aggro mirrors can actually be pretty good. Ranger's Guile against control without Teferi can be pretty good. Ranger's Guile against like Nissa Krasis is terrible. So I think that it bumped up a little bit, but I just still wonder if Magic's actually about that anymore. Like that's the question that I have right now. Yeah.
Legit.
They should have not been cowards, and they just should have reprinted Blossoming Defense. That's kind of like what? Like Blossoming Defense. Why didn't they just reprint that card, dude? That card was fine. That card was not overpowered in the format that it was printed in. Like, why can't we just have that instead? Anyway, all right. mini rant adjourned. So, all right. So we've kind of like had some kind of like top level discussions, but do you think, like, let's see if we can come up with some kind of like a tier list for what we think might be going on now. So at the top of the format, we can probably both agree that there's going to be some kind of Simic ramp deck. Does that sound right to you?
Something in the... I don't think it will be Simic. I think it will be something in the vein of Teamer or Bant so that it does interact, or Sultai. But yes, I agree that a an Uro Nissa deck will be competitive top tier.
Yeah. So I think that's safe to say some combination of Simic I think is still going to be good. Whether, throw in your third color of choice or maybe the vanilla one. I think is still going to be very playable. And then, like an aggro deck, whether it's mono red or mono green or both, I think is going to be, if not tier 1, then 1.5.
At the very minimum, it will feel like it because you're going to play those decks a lot.
Yep.
This week.
Yeah.
Like a lot. Be ready for them.
Agreed. I would definitely put Team of Clover in the at least 1.5 tier, and maybe it proves itself to be better than that.
I'm not quite ready for it, but I get where you're coming from.
Okay, right on. Let's talk about Control. Like, what do you think Control's best shot is at the moment? Do you think Azorius still is looking like it could be a tier 1 Control deck?
To use a limited metaphor, my pack one, pick one is to try to make a good blue-white Control deck for the meta. So I've got to get to work.
Now, is that just because of your predilection, or do you think in general it's just still a pretty good idea?
Both. I think that Yorion is still a busted card who wasn't affected very much by the bannings.
Yes.
Although Teferi hurts.
Yorion is definitely on Arjuna's short list of cards that I hate that I'm keeping an eye on, that I think it's like Yorion's on the Winota list for me, for sure. Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of those cards that still scares me a lot. I think Ugin is kind of the counterplay to it, but not many people are believing in Ugin, so we'll see. It's one of those cards I didn't put on the list because I think it's a bit of a sleeper, and I think it does have a natural predator in Ugin. But if Aggro is out there keeping Ugin away, can we do the thing? Can we loop-de-loop?
Yeah, do you think... Okay, so this is an interesting thing we didn't get much into. Do you think that, like, Orzhov Yorion or Esper Yorion got a big boost with these bans?
No, I think neither one is very good.
Just categorically, they just weren't good enough anyway?
Yep, I think they're slow. I think their mana's clunky. I think the 80-card version of the decks are unreliable, and I think that they get trounced by things that don't have the same consistency issues.
I think that's fair. Also, okay, if you're sleeving up the card Burglar Rat in a constructed format, you really have to look in the mirror, You really just have to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah. Hitting the hand isn't what it used to be, especially opponent's choice. The battlefield is just too fast, too much tempo. We'll see. I mean, like you said, right now it's all about hope. All these things could come to pass, but I look at a lot of the cards that I dismissed in the past, and are the reasons still there to dismiss them because there are better options that are more consistent or reliable? Yeah, that's exactly where those decks fall for me.
Yep, that's totally fair. All right, we've talked about how much the sack decks lost with Cauldron Familiar. Like, I don't know. Like, are people still going to be playing Rakdos? Are people still going to be playing Jaunt?
There's enough powerful cards to build a deck that curves out well, puts a ton of pressure on the opponent, and wins games. But there are still mana issues, and I don't see how those look great compared to monocolored aggro or something with Uro. Now, I think that Claim the Firstborn is a really powerful card, and people have learned that. And that Priest of Forgotten Gods is a powerful card, and people have learned that too, although it's going to have to face the Bone Crusher test. And without Cat, is there enough payoff to run a Witch's Oven?
Yeah.
A card that is mostly a dead draw if it doesn't work with the other cards in your deck.
It's a really good
I would
point.
say probably not. I think that's a big question that you have to answer. And unless you find a better way to play Sacrifice, I don't think you run Oven anymore. Now, you might build around Village Rites and Woe Strider.
Yeah.
Like, those are sack outlets that seem to have a ton of upside.
Yeah.
Those might still be reasons to run Claim.
Yeah. And
But I don't know.
Laris is still in the format, so
Yeah.
we might, like... I don't know if this deck will still be playable, but I remember the kind of the more aggro build of Rakdos Sack in the previous recent standard formats was a really strong deck, and so I wonder if a deck like that could still hum along without Cat Oven in it. Croxa is a strong card, Laris is a strong card, we still have cards like Dreadhorde Butcher. There's always the old Dreadhorde Butcher Demon Hug combo that you love so much. So
that's legit.
yeah. And then, there's other cards which, okay, I'm not saying this card is necessarily good, but cards like Fireblade Artist, point to a different, so a deck with Fireblade Artist and Dreadhorde Butcher, stuff like that, points to a different build, a different style, maybe a deck running cards like Robber of the Rich, for example. I don't know if it's good, but I think that there are enough powerful 2-drops in that archetype, and there are enough powerful kind of long game cards like Woe Strider, like Laris, like Croxa, that I don't know. A deck like that could easily be, again, 1.5, I would say. You're not feeling
not
it?
ready for that. Nope.
All right.
Nope.
Yep. That's
not ready for 1.5.
That's one of the ones I'm going to keep my eye on the most. Is how playable Rakdos is, because I think Jund is Jund must be dead, right? It's hard for me to okay, Goose, I guess. Goose being able to make food might still be Goose, Trail of Crumbs, some other stuff might still be kind of okay, but I don't know. I just think that Jund's days are numbered, personally. I think that Jund lost more from the cat ban than Rakdos did.
I think they both lost a lot.
Yeah, it's fair.
More than I think people even will realize until they do try it. So we'll see.
Yeah, interesting. All right, is there any kind of top level deck or archetype that you think is missing from this discussion so far?
That's a good question. Because if we knew it was missing, we sure as heck would bring it up, right?
Let's
what
just
is
talk.
Gonna surprise us? What's gonna get us?
Yeah, that's okay. Is there any reason to revisit Mutate?
Yeah, there's always a good reason to check it out. Paradise Druid, the hexproofness. Some people might just not be ready for that.
Yeah,
it's possible. It does still feel like a pretty soft strategy that gets a little bit of splash damage from Winota. Grafdigger's Cage is terrible for it.
That's true. That's a good point.
I don't know. I'm always looking for reasons not to play Mutate, so I might be the wrong person to ask, but it does seem like there's a shell there that got pushed out of the meta by more powerful things, and maybe it shouldn't have been. Maybe it's still a possibility. Okay,
how about this non-Simic flash decks?
I just think that they suffer the same problems. Dimir Flash is something everybody wants to work, and I keep having the same problems with it.
I know that's an archetype that you've put some amount of thought and work into. Yeah,
and I think it's still the same problem. These cards are good. They're usually, when you play a flash card, right, you have to give up some amount of the power of the card to have the ability flash. And there's nothing in these flash cards that is like a rate monster. You know what I mean? So you're relying on having the right counters and the right removal for the opponent's rate monsters that they're going to play, because they're not playing flash cards. They're going to, generally speaking, their cards are going to be better than yours, and you have to answer them in the right way at the right time. And if you run out of cards and they don't run out of cards, you're just your deck is significantly weaker. Your creatures are usually smaller on rate versus theirs. So the problem is just that you always have to have this perfect mix, and it's not really there. The deck can stick a Slitherwisp and get ahead that way, but doesn't pass the Bone Crusher test. I can promise you that.
Yeah, my assessment of these decks is that they're playing 2018 Magic. Like these Dimir Flash decks are like, they're trying to like get a little bit of value, draw an extra card, get a little cost reduction out of your Nightbonder, stuff like that. And that's just like it's just not keeping up with the power level of modern Magic cards. So I think that this deck
is your broken card, right? What is your broken card?
That's it. That's it.
Anything close to what was on the list earlier?
Well, that's what I was thinking. It's like I would take one Nightpack Ambusher over any of these cards, right? Like that's a card, dude. Like that's a card that wins you the game, right? Being able to play, Nissa Nightpack Ambusher in your Flash deck, like that's a finisher right there. So yeah, I agree. And I'll tell you what, Dirgebat is not the top end that's going to save this deck, that's for sure.
Nor is Voracious Great Shark, for that matter.
Yeah, Voracious Great Shark. All right. You know, Voracious Great Shark is a missed opportunity. If the text on that card said counter target spell, I would be more interested in it. Creature or artifact is just not enough, you know? And even if it did say just counter target spell, I'm still not sure that it would be good enough, but it would be getting there. It would be worth considering, I think. All right, well, let's wrap it up there. We've done plenty of discussion. There's plenty of speculation. Thank you guys for sticking with us through this long conversation. Yeah, I don't know, CGB. I'm excited about Standard again. And, you know, we didn't get to Historic this episode, but I think that that's something that we can come back and revisit in the future. I think it's still an evolving format. And so, I'm excited, dude.
Dude, they did it.
Yep.
We talked about it. It was a little, they waited a little longer than I said. I said that they should finish the Players Tour finals and then immediately ban Wilderness Reclamation and Growth Spiral. They should announce it on the stream. They waited about 24 more hours, but they freaking did. So
good on them.
That's freaking cool. Good. Magic in August, that's exciting. What is this world we are living in, dude?
I love it. I love it. So, you know, share your appreciation with Wizards. Let them know that you like this. Play Standard. Have fun. The metrics will show it. They'll feel rewarded. We'll feel rewarded. Everything will be great. All right, so that's going to do it for this bonus episode here. Thanks for joining us again. And you can find the podcast on your favorite podcatcher, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify even. Just search for Arena Craft Podcast. It will come up. Arena Craft, 2 words, not 1 word. You can also find this show on YouTube. We're expanding into the video content a little bit. And when I return to streaming on Twitch, which will hopefully be soon, you'll be able to watch the play there. You can also catch Covertgoblue in his YouTube channel, Covertgoblue. You can also watch him on Twitch, twitch.tv/Covertgoblue. He streams Monday through Thursday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. And he's a very entertaining content creator, so go and give his channel a watch. All right, CGB, looking forward to discussing the new developments in the meta next time.
Later.